and welcome to Just Us Thinking. I'm your host, Michael.
And I'm your co-host, Rebecca.
And I'm your AV guy, Mikey.
And we are going to be back here with our trauma series. This is part 2.
Part 2, hello mother, hello father.
So we're going to go into a little bit more of my background.
Okay.
And kind of where that goes. But before that, I think you have a little bit more on trauma as a general, right?
Right. So when we experience any kind of trauma, it's said that you respond, you have so many different ways to cope with it. A lot of people are familiar with the fight or flight response, but there's actually 4 of them that are like the main responses.
Right. So there is fight and flight. Those are the 2 major survival ones. That comes in trauma as well. But what are the other 2?
The other 2 are freeze and fawn.
Okay. So freezing. Now, there are people that freeze up. So Mikey, you're that person, right?
I am that person, yes.
So your go-to is going to be freeze.
Yes.
Okay. That's kind of your go-to. Now, here's the thing. As you learn to cope with trauma, you may notice that in dealing with different trauma, you may run the gambit. You may do all of these.
Yeah. I can see like myself kind of like I don't think I would fall into like one category. I'd probably do like a little bit of all 4.
Yeah. And the reality is when you try and say, well, this is the type I am, that's what I do.
Yeah.
It really depends on the situation. It really depends.
Yeah, every situation's a little bit different, so.
And you got to understand that, when you're dealing with trauma, your first reaction may be flight, but if something triggers oh my God, this is going to be really bad, I've got to fight this one.
Yeah.
You may have originally been a flight, but that trauma has caused you to switch over to a fight mode.
Okay.
Because running doesn't work anymore. And then you get into, I will tell you, and I hear the scenario all the time. People are always proud of, someone's in a relationship that's getting abused. And when the girl finally has enough of the guy beating her, she grabs a frying pan, hit him over the head, and runs out the door.
Yeah.
Now, I'm telling you, everybody is like, yep, there you go. She took charge. And everybody's happy that she did that. She's like, yep, she confronted her demons. She was going from flight mode into a fight mode. And when you've had enough, you jumped in there. My problem with this is when she's had enough and now she's going to go, she's tired of the fawn, and she's been through that, or she was trying to, the flight, that didn't work. Now she's to the point where now it's fight. And she punches the guy, and then, now all of a sudden she established her. Sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah.
Everybody cheers that person. Everybody, when you see that story on TV, you cheer, but you don't see it when it's the opposite.
Yep.
And because that's the problem is when you're a guy, if you were in an abusive relationship and the other person was doing that to you, you were trained. You don't hit a girl.
Right.
So you got to understand that there's a whole nother trauma that goes into that, because when now you're forced to fight because now you think you're in danger, and you go into fight mode, and even if you use that to stand up, then you get beat down later on, generally by yourself, was you hit a girl. What kind of man are you?
Yeah. And
then that second doubt kicks in, and it's shunned upon. And that's why I think most domestic violences, that's why the numbers are all skewed. I don't think men are willing to step up and say,
stand up, yeah.
This happened to me, because you can't do that as a guy. That's where the problem is. So now this part 2 is going to be kind of my upbringing. So we're going to go into my parental structure.
Okay.
So
where are you going to kind of start us off with?
I'm going to start us off with so my mother and father, they're divorced. They've been divorced since I think I was 5 or so. I think
wow.
even maybe before that.
Yeah.
So now as a young person, you don't know what the dynamics are. I will tell you, with my father, the way he treated my mother, he always made her out to be the bad guy. Okay. And now my mother had issues too. We all have issues.
Yeah, we all do.
So, and this is where trauma, really gets involved there. So, what I understand from talking with both my mother and my father, and my father has passed away since then, so that's kind of why it's a little touchy subject as well.
Okay.
So my mother and my father had an arrangement that my mother was going to go to work and then my father was going to go to school. So when my father graduated school, the idea was he was going to go out and get a job and start working, and then my mother was going to go back to school. That way they could both improve.
I mean, that sounds pretty reasonable.
Yeah, it's a perfectly reasonable relationship.
Okay.
And then I don't know why my father went to school first. I don't know. I don't know what. Looking back at it now, could there have been some manipulation that he did? Probably. I wasn't there. I don't know. But he went to school first.
Okay.
Okay. And then when he got a job, and my mother's like, okay, it's my turn. Mm-hmm. No.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he basically said no. And just kind of, he got what he wanted out of that, and then he was going to be kind of a jerk about it. So that's kind of where my father comes in. And I remember hearing, and he bragged. The problem I have with my father is he bragged about the divorce.
Oh, wow, really?
Oh yeah, he tells a story, and when he tells a story, it's when you're a kid, you're like, I don't know, it's kind of weird.
Okay.
So he said that when they got divorced, they signed all the paperwork. He filed in, I thought he filed outside of the area. He moved to Orange County area in California.
Okay.
He moved quite a bit away from my mother, and he filed in the county that he was at. And he did that because he wanted her to drive the distance.
Wow.
He basically did it to inconvenience her. Okay. And then they did this divorce. They went through, and I don't know if it was divorce. Doesn't always start off bad or doesn't end bad, or sometimes it ends bad and gets better. Yeah, divorce is kind of weird. So he then, they got divorced, and then he said, "Well, how about we go out to lunch or one more time?"
Okay.
And he took her to a really expensive restaurant. Order whatever you want. And the way he tells a story is he took her out. He was like, "Nope, I'll pay," and everything. And and I don't know, I wasn't there. I would have to ask my mother, or my mother is listening to this. I would like to know a little bit more about how this went. But
okay.
He said, "Oh yeah, my mother was very impressed." She's like, "Oh, if you would have done this more often when we were married," she's like, "Why didn't you do this more often? Or why are you doing this now?" And his response was, "Well, I wanted to show what you were going to miss."
Oh.
And he's proud about that. He was very proud about taking her out and basically doing that to her.
Wow.
To me, that tells me you didn't really care for that person.
No. And no.
Kind of a jerk thing to do, right?
Quite a big jerk thing to do, yeah.
So, I mean, he just, I don't know. Now, don't get me wrong. We probably, in a relationship, you always want to say, I'll show them how well I have it now. But the way he says that story and reads that story to us, or he's kind of explained that to him, he kind of has this like twinkle in his eye and that smile, like, I'm gonna show her, and that's, I don't know, that's, I see it now. I didn't see it then.
Wow, that is, wow.
Right. So then you have, for me, I remember he would always say stuff against my mother. Mm-hmm. He was very, very good at planting that seed of doubt. He would plant that, and swear to God, he could be a gardener, because he knew how to make that thing grow just great, slow grow, and just because the more you let it grow, that those roots sink in, and he was very good at manipulating that. Okay. I remember that about him. It's not a good thing, but I remember he did a really good job of poisoning me against my mother, and that ruined any kind of relationship that I could ever have with my mother.
Wow, that's really too bad. I mean, it's, yeah, wow.
It's kind of crazy. It's just, that's what he did. And now I talk to my mother. I talk to her. We have conversations.
Yeah.
We talk about a lot of stuff that we haven't talked about in a long time. But he really did that. And then on top of that, he would buy me things, and he would, that seed of doubt is, if you take that over, your mom's going to see it. She's going to get mad, and she's going to do that. And it was kind of weird that a lot of my stuff couldn't go over there. Mm-hmm. It was bought for his house, and it stayed there, with the exception of a few items. Okay. Now there was what I noticed he did was, my bike wasn't supposed to go over there. Okay. So I remember that very, very well. I remember he bought me a bike, and it couldn't go over to my mother's house. And I wanted it to, because I could ride it on the dirt roads out there. I really wanted to. And then when he bought me that bike, I remember he told me it couldn't go over. I remember that.
Oh, wow.
And then I remember him dropping me off at my mother's house, and that bike getting pulled out. And I was confused, because I'm like, that's not supposed to be here. And he wanted my mother to see that he's buying me stuff.
Oh, wow.
And I want to say that's when he said, well, if it's okay with your mother, you could ride this around here and then just bring it back next week. Mm-hmm. when I come pick you up. And I remember that kind of used to piss my mother off.
Well, yeah. I mean,
he would buy me stuff, and then he basically used it as like currency and flash.
Yeah.
And he did those kind of things to say, look, I could buy him stuff, and
you can't, or something like that.
Yeah, that's kind of the attitude.
Okay. It
was kind of
a great attitude to have.
Right. Now, he also, I'm going to fast forward with him. He also did that with you, Mikey, right?
He did. Every time he would buy me a toy, he would say it would have to stay at my house. It cannot go over to your mom and dad's house.
Right. And that was his way of controlling things. See, if that was over there, if you brought it home, so if you brought that object home, I think he felt that you had no reason to go see him, but if he's going to attract you with those toys. So if you want to play with that toy, you got to go see him.
I could see that.
He did the same thing with Tiffany. He did the exact same with Tiffany. It was all manipulation. It's how he held things above people. He always had to have that carrot on a stick, and you couldn't get the carrot. He was very manipulative that way. So that's what I remember. Unfortunately, that's what I remember with him. Now that he is gone, there's some good memories, but I just look back and see what he did to me.
Wow.
And then
I can't even imagine.
I didn't even realize until it was too late what he was doing with my own kids.
Yeah.
Because it kind of felt familiar and I didn't like it, but that's why I said a lot of times, I didn't want, my kids over there all the time because I knew what he did.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a pain point that I had in my marriage.
Okay.
So
that makes sense,
So
you look at it that way.
My father did a lot, there's a lot of, things that he did that even though you don't realize what he did, they still stuck. They still got in there, and it was trauma that was planted on purpose. And I want to say that was horrible.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a good way to really live.
No, it wasn't. And then I remember he got with Sandy, my stepmother.
Okay.
Now, Sandy had another child from another marriage. Okay. Shortly after I was born, or right before I was born, my mother was pregnant with me.
Okay.
Okay. And my father had a vasectomy. Okay.
Okay.
So, and then he didn't tell her.
Oh.
Right.
Wow.
So he didn't tell her. So he almost even questioned whether I was his.
Oh.
So.
Wow. Really?
Oh yeah. Because the vasectomy was really in that same neighborhood. So I was it. I was all that he was going to have. So, and then, but he hid it from her. He didn't tell her. And then she found out after he had the vasectomy, and she found out afterwards. That's kind of shitty to do when you're married to somebody.
Yeah.
So, just the way he was. So, now he married Sandy, and Sandy had a kid from another marriage, and then I used to come visit on the weekends. Okay. Now, Sandy, this is my opinion, she seemed very, I guess, not happy with me coming over. I believe she thought I was stealing time away from her and my father. So I was she treated me that way.
Wow.
That's how I felt. So, I was also a very picky eater. Mm-hmm. I still am today.
Yes,
I still am today. Now, there's a whole nother trauma there.
Yeah. Well, and I thought, it's so funny because I'm like, I always thought to myself I was really picky too about what I ate and how I ate it. And then you came along and I'm like, oh, wow, there's actually someone a little worse than I am.
So my mother used to work a lot.
Okay.
She worked a lot. So a lot of times it was just, throw me a corn dog or, something like that. It was a lot of food that was fast.
Okay.
Okay. And then Sandy, she knew how picky I was. It almost seemed like she didn't want me around. Mm-hmm. So it got to the point where when I was starting to spend more time over there, I always felt like anything I did just wasn't going to cut the mustard. Okay? I felt that way. I felt no matter what I did with this woman, she's not going to like me.
Okay.
And she told me that quite a bit. She did tell me that quite a bit. Now, this is where the when you're a young kid and you don't understand. I never liked mayonnaise. Mm-hmm. Hated mayonnaise. Ugh. I'm not a mayonnaise person. So when I was there, my father would be at work. I would be over there for a long weekend, or if I was there for summer break or something, what would happen is we would go to the pool. We lived in an apartment complex that had a pool.
Okay.
She loved to go to the pool. Okay, so we all got to go to the pool, and generally we would have lunch right before we get to the pool. she would put mayonnaise on my sandwich, and I said, I don't like mayonnaise.
Yeah.
Okay. So then she decided to say, well, if you either eat it or you don't go to the pool.
Oh, wow.
So I
Nice.
said, oh yeah. So I said something to my father, and she's like, well, you have to eat. I'm like, so then my sandwiches slowly got more and more mayonnaise on them.
Ugh.
Because the first few times I kind of scraped it off and I kind of just ate it just to eat it.
Yeah.
But it was horrible.
Yeah.
And when she saw me scrape it off, she put more and more on there. And then it was, don't scrape it off. If you don't scrape it off, if you scrape it off, I don't count that as eating. It turned out that sandwich had more mayonnaise than it had bologna on it.
Wow.
Oh.
Ugh.
And then at that point I said, fine, I won't go to the pool. I'll just go sit in my room. No. That wasn't an option. I had to go to the pool with everybody else, but I had to watch them all swim and have fun. I couldn't participate. I couldn't get in the pool. I couldn't do anything. There's a few times that she brought the sandwich down to the pool and I had to sit in the corner. And if I would take a bite, I could put my feet in the pool for 5 minutes.
Wow.
And, it was a horrible experience for me. And I got to the point where it started making it to the point where I really didn't want to come visit my father.
Yeah. I mean,
And
understandable.
At one point, I told him, I think one time, I'm like, on my way home to my mother's, I'm like, I don't want to go back home because this is what, I don't like mayonnaise. I don't want to eat that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And of course, now what I didn't know, what I kind of, I found out later that what happened is, now that I don't want to go there, the reason I was going to see my father, in his eyes, is it was sticking it to my mother.
Okay.
I was a pawn. So when I don't want to go there anymore, then he can't let my mother win. So that would cause arguments between him and Sandy.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
that got to the point where I got home, and then it was all of a sudden, now mayo was no longer a problem. But you know what? We're going to do a big dinner. All of a sudden we're doing big dinners there.
Yeah.
And it was like, stuff I wouldn't eat. And I was told, oh, if you don't like it, pick around it.
Okay.
And okay, so I did that to a certain point. I found ways that, and here's the trauma with that today. When we go and you say, is there something you like? Even today I say, if we go there, I'll find something I'll eat.
Yeah.
That's me picking through the food.
Okay.
I still have that, mental issue there. So I learned how to pick through the food. I learned how to kind of eat what eat around certain things.
Right.
That kind of pissed her off. Because then I would eat certain things, like if it was like a chicken casserole with peas and stuff like that, I'd pick around the vegetables.
Yeah.
That's what I did. I'd eat that. Now, the problem is if I ever wanted to have seconds, I couldn't because there's still things on my plate.
Oh.
So I learned really quick to grab kind of a quick, big thing and act like I'm eating more, and that caused a problem. So now it got to the point where she got so pissed off at me one time that she pulled one of the... I wouldn't eat something. She made something for dinner. My father, I don't know where he went. He left. He either went upstairs or he went to do something else.
Okay.
And then she tied me to a chair, like physically tied me to a chair.
Wow.
And then she said, if you want to be a big baby, I'm going to treat you like a big baby. You want to be, you don't want to eat what we're telling you, then I'm going to feed you baby food. She pulled out a little can of baby food. And she says, if you don't want to eat your vegetables like a big boy, you're going to eat them like a baby. And she then proceeded to try to force feed me baby food.
Ew.
I was tied down. If I didn't eat it, or if I didn't open my mouth, she would smear it all over my face.
Oh, wow. And you were how old?
I was 8 or 9.
Oh, wow.
Somewhere in that neighborhood. 8, 9, somewhere. It was 8, 9, or 10. Somewhere in in that area that I was.
Okay.
She just it just seemed like she resented every little bit about me.
She had an issue. She had her issues.
Well, yes, she did. So now everything. Very, I don't want to say everything because there's something weird here. Okay. So I must have been. The relationship lasted for a little bit. I mean, I want to say I was like, I think when I started to get around 10, a little older, started to get into the double digits in age.
Yeah.
We still got the feeling of resentment. I was treated like second fiddle. So Brian, my brother Brian got, she held him, and he could do no wrong.
Oh, okay.
Then it got to the point where Crystal came along. So now this is where it is. So now Sandy had an affair with someone else when she was married with my father.
Okay.
So Crystal, my sister, is not a biological of my father.
Okay.
She has another father. He is in another. I looked him up at one time. He's in another state.
Okay.
I don't know. Sandy had an affair. I don't know if she knew that he had a vasectomy or not, but I remember the blow up of that can't be mine.
Yeah.
I remember the argument.
Wow.
I remember the fight. But yeah, but here's my father. I don't know why he stuck around. I don't know why.
Oh.
But he decided to stick around, and they were still going. I don't know. The relationship was still there, and I was still treated like crap. And I was at one point. I remember. I don't know what happened, but there was a point where no matter what happened, it would be a nightmare, And then pretty much every interaction with this woman was horrible, with the exception of one. And I still don't have the answer to this.
Okay. Which one was that?
So we would go to a roller skating rink. Okay. Now, you would see us drive there, and you could tell we hated each other. Okay.
Okay.
So if you saw us interacting outside, at home, anywhere else, you could tell we didn't like each other at all. We get to a skating rink. We are best friends, sharing fries, doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Nope. We're talking. We're normal. She's treating me normally. She seemed very motherly to me. It's like we get to that skating rink, and then for some reason we were clicking 100%. There was all that trauma, all that drama, all that abuse.
Yeah.
Goes out the window. We'd have a great time. And we'd be there for, 3 or 4 hours. I mean, with this, that was a thing back then.
Yeah. It was still kind of when I was a little bit above Mikey's age, probably. Or a little bit younger than Mikey. I'd go to the skating rink all the time.
Yeah.
I remember those days.
No, like I said, I think I was right around the age of 10.
Yeah.
It was... I remember those. I remember with her very, very vividly.
That is really odd.
It's like we would go over there, and then she'd come back. I'm like, I could see her coming behind. I'm like, and I'm still eating some fries, and I'm like, we should have gotten the churros. And sure enough, there's a churro on the table. She went and got it. I'm like, there's no goddamn way we're on the same wavelength here.
Wow.
And so we would skate together. She taught me how to skate. She taught me how to roller skate. She taught me how to skate backwards. She taught me all kinds of stuff. And then I remember putting the skates away.
Yeah.
I remember getting in the car, and we hated each other. We hated each other. That car ride home the first time was horrible.
That is so, like, that's just odd.
Yeah.
Like,
it's the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, some of those car rides to and from, if we were in the good mindset, the ride there transformed. So sometimes it wasn't just walking in the door. It was just okay, as soon as we get in the car, okay, we're going to do this and this. And all of a sudden, it was a different animal. And then we would get home, and like we would get out of that car, and then home would sit in, and back to hating each other.
Wow.
And the weirdest thing, right?
Yeah, that is like really, really
she
odd.
She hated me unless we were at the skating rink. I at this point, I almost want to say that skating rink to me was a magical place because
that would make sense.
We had to have been in a different dimension. Had to be. There's no way that we had to walk through some gateway in that. I'll be honest with you. I don't understand it.
The disco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A disco ball, and all of a sudden, I don't know, maybe she had some trauma that, when she walked through that door, all that stress released off her. I don't know. That could be.
That is, I mean, I liked going to the skating rink too, but I don't know if I would like change my like total personality for it.
It was. I swear to God, she didn't go in that skating rink with me. Someone else did that looked just like her.
Wow.
It's kind of crazy. So now that's my kind of upbringing. So that, unfortunately, I'm still a picky eater for that.
Yeah.
And I'm used to watching what my father did to my mother, how he manipulated, and now looking back, I'm like, wow, that's kind of really fucked up.
Yeah. There was a lot in that story that's kind of fucked up.
Yeah. I remember going to trips with them to all kinds of national parks and everything. A lot of times when we were out in nature, it was a lot better. I could tell that Brian was favored way more than I was.
Yeah. But didn't you tell me at that one point you weren't treated as bad as you were like in the house? Or I mean, the state park trips, were they were somewhat enjoyable, right?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were actually a lot more enjoyable, and I don't know if it was because we were out in public and she wanted to
play the good mom,
play the good stepmom.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was just her way of playing that game.
Okay.
So, and if that was the case, then so be it, because it did make it easier on me.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how were my background, and that unfortunately I picked up a lot of things from my parents, and some of the things I've seen that I didn't even know I saw. You pick that up, and that trauma does carry along with you. And I mean, I just remember how horrible my mother was treated. Mm-hmm. Now I have to say, I probably wasn't, coming back from my dad's and then saying, oh, I got to do this and I got to do that. I could see how that could grate on her nerves, and I could see why that it kind of, when he did that, he planted that seed, and then no matter what interaction with my mother, it was going to be a bad interaction. And, and then of course, when you treat someone else bad, you're getting it back, and then there's a lot more.
It's
a lot
just
more
too
stuff.
bad that she couldn't differentiate and make realize that was your dad's doing.
It's hard to do it.
Yeah.
It's when you're, especially when it's a kid, that happens. That's a problem now. When you, especially if that kid has any traits of that other parent,
yeah,
that causes a lot of issues. And if my mother was seeing my father, in me, could it have been where she took some of that out on me? That could be. So, but I got to say, I didn't have a good relationship with my mother. And then the other mother figure in my life tied me down and force fed me baby food, and then did things that just confused the fuck out of me.
Wow.
So that was kind of my upbringing. So
okay.
I think that's good for part 2. I think that's a good place that we're gonna go. I know it's a long story, guys. I'm sorry. That's why we piece this in so you could kind of go through. So just kind of bear with us. This is part 2. This is going to be kind of where my upbringing came from.
Okay.
And some of the trauma I did when I was a kid. So now you could also continue to watch us on Facebook, Instagram, and X.
Yep. And then, of course, you can listen to us on any of your podcast players like iHeart, Spotify, Apple, YouTube Music, Amazon, or Samsung.
Now, you could also watch our videos or listen on YouTube, Rumble, and then we do shorts on TikTok while it's still around. So
yeah. We'll see how much longer that lasts, huh?
Right. So that's kind of part 2, kind of give you the background of where I saw my parents and what I dealt with there.
Okay.
I guess stay tuned for part 3.
Bye, everybody.